There is a jar of thickened milk sitting on a kitchen counter in the mountains between the Black Sea and the Caspian, and inside that jar lives a community more crowded and more diverse than anything you will ever buy in a bottle. Not a factory, not a laboratory, a jar of milk, a rubbery little cluster of grains, and time. When scientists finally sequenced the DNA of what was living in that jar, they didn't find one microbe. They did not find two. They found, across the samples they tested, up to 61 distinct kinds of bacteria, plus dozens of yeasts, all working together in a single spoonful. And on the shelf at the pharmacy, in a sealed capsule that cost $40 a month, they found one, sometimes two. That is the whole story, and it is a strange one, because the crowded jar of milk costs almost nothing, feeds you forever, and cannot be patented. The capsule with its two strains is $1 billion industry. This is not a story about a cure. It is a story about why the crowded jar was pushed to the edge of the modern kitchen, while the nearly empty capsule took the center shelf. The ferment is milk kefir. Welcome to Lost Plant Remedies. To understand it, you have to travel to where it was born. Milk kefir did not come from a company. It came from the Caucasus Mountains, the high country shared today by Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the North Caucasus peoples, the Karachay, the Balkar, the Ossetian. There, for generations that nobody can count, families kept small clusters of pale, cauliflower-like grains alive by feeding them fresh milk. The grains were treated as living wealth, passed down within a household, guarded, rarely given away. The heritage that surrounds them is drenched in legend, and it is worth telling as legend, not as verified history. The old stories say the grains were a gift from the Prophet Muhammad, handed to the mountain peoples along with the secret of how to use them. Folklore held that if you gave the grains away without also passing on the knowledge, the grains would lose their power and die. Whether any of that literally happened, no one can prove. What is not legend is that the practice was real, continuous, and closely held for a very long time before the outside world ever heard of it. The popular history of how kefir left the mountains reads like a spy novel, and here too you should treat it as a widely repeated tale rather than a documented fact. As the story goes, in the late 19th century, Russian physicians grew fascinated by rumours of unusual longevity in the Caucasus, and the medical societies of the empire wanted the grains for study. A dairy company run by the Blandov brothers of Moscow supposedly sent an agent to obtain grains from a Caucasus prince, and the plot involved a romance, an abduction, and a court settlement that ended with the grains handed over as compensation. By the early 1900s, so the account runs, the Blandov company was producing kefir commercially, and from Russia it spread across Poland, Ukraine, the Baltics, and the whole Soviet bloc breakfast table, charming, unverified, and probably embellished. But the destination is solid history. By the 20th century, kefir was a mainstream daily staple across Eastern Europe, sold in every shop, drunk like buttermilk, treated as ordinary food. Then the science arrived, and the science is where it stops being folklore and starts being a detective story. The first hard clinical result came in 2003. Stephen R. Hertzler and Shannon M. Clancy at Ohio State University took 15 adults with diagnosed lactose maldigestion, the people whose bodies struggle to break down milk sugar, and had them drink kefir instead of plain milk. They measured breath hydrogen over 8 hours, the standard way to catch undigested lactose fermenting in the gut. Kefir significantly improved lactose digestion and reduced the symptoms compared to milk. The reason is elegant. During fermentation, the culture's own enzymes chew through much of the lactose before it ever reaches your stomach, a milk product that the milk intolerant could actually drink. But the truly astonishing finding came 10 years later, and it is the reason for the number in the title. In 2013, a team from University College Cork and the Teagasc Food Research Centre in Ireland, led by A.J. Marsh, with O. O'Sullivan, Colin Hill, R.P. Ross, and Paul Cotter, did something no one had done at that scale. They took kefir grains and finished kefir from 8 geographically distinct regions and ran high-throughput DNA sequencing on all of it, reading the genetic signature of every microbe present. Published in PLoS ONE, their results were staggering. In the kefir milk itself, they counted between 22 and 61 distinct bacterial types, depending on the sample. In the grains, between 24 and 56. And that is before you count the yeasts, which ran into the dozens. Read that carefully, because honesty matters here. 61 is the top of a range, not a guaranteed number in every jar. Your own kitchen culture will vary. What the DNA proved is that kefir is not a one-bug or two-bug food. It is a living ecosystem, and across real samples that ecosystem reached up to 61 bacterial types working together. Now hold that against the capsule on the pharmacy shelf, where the label lists one strain or two, occasionally a handful. The gap is not a marketing exaggeration. It is what the sequencer read. Diversity alone, though, would not matter if the microbes just washed straight through you. So the next question the scientists asked was the important one. Does any of this actually stick? Here is where you have to be careful, because the easy claim, the one that sells, is that kefir colonizes your gut for life. The real science is something more modest and more honest, and I'm going to give it to you straight. In 2016, an Italian and Argentine collaboration, led by S. Carassi, tested a single kefir organism, Lactobacillus kefiri, the strain called LKF-ESRO1, on 20 healthy volunteers who took it daily for 1 month. During that month, the organism was recovered in the stool of all 20. Every single one, and it did real work, measurably shifting the gut community and reducing several genera associated with inflammation. That is a live human result, and it is meaningful. But 1 month after the volunteers stopped taking it, the organism was still detectable in only 2 or 3 of the 20. It faded. It did not take up permanent residence from a single dose. So the truthful version is this. Kefir does not colonize your gut forever from 1 spoonful. What it does is genuinely engraft and reshape your microbiome while it is a regular part of your life, and then it largely clears within about a month after you stop. That is still a far stronger claim than most capsule strains can make, because most of them are pure passengers, detectable only while you swallow them and gone almost immediately. Laboratory work backs up why kefir is different. Argentine researchers at the Sidka Institute showed in the dish that Lactobacillus kefiri strains physically bind to gastric mucin and to the mucus lining of the small intestine and colon, using surface layer proteins on their outer coat. Strip those proteins off and the binding collapses. This is lab evidence, not proof of lifelong colonization in a living person, but it explains the mechanism. Kefir microbes are built to hold on, not just to pass by. And the jar does more than seed your gut, because a living ferment is never a single-use thing. Kefir stacks functions the way the old kitchens always demanded. Strain it thick and you have kefir cheese, a spreadable soft cheese that wastes nothing. Use its acidity and live culture like buttermilk, and it leavens and enriches bread. Give it a second ferment with fruit and it turns into a lightly carbonated probiotic drink. In animal studies, kefir gel dressed infected wounds in rats and sped healing against a control. In mice, oral kefir raised IgA-producing immune cells not only in the gut but in the lungs, in a dose-dependent, viability-dependent way. And in the lab, whole kefir and its polysaccharide kefirin fought enteric pathogens including E. coli, Salmonella and Shigella in zone of inhibition tests. The grains themselves even adapt, learning to ferment soy and coconut milk when dairy is not the goal. I will name one more line of research and then draw a firm line around it, because a lot of the internet gets this wrong. Kefir contains a polysaccharide called kefiran, and in rat models, kefiran lowered cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides, and blood pressure. There is also a separate 2020 human trial that showed a roughly 9.5% drop in blood pressure over 8 weeks, but that trial used an isolated casein peptide in a tablet. It was not a kefir trial, so be honest with yourself. Kefir's own cardiovascular evidence is promising animal model work, not a proven human blood pressure result. Believe the sequencer and the lactose trial and the adhesion data. Treat the heart claims as encouraging early science, which brings us to the real puzzle. If a living ferment holds up to 61 kinds of bacteria, adheres to your gut, and costs almost nothing, why is the pharmacy shelf full of 2-strain capsules instead? The answer is not a ban. There is no conspiracy here, no regulator burying kefir, and I will not pretend there is. The answer is business model economics, and the numbers tell it cleanly. The global probiotic supplement market was worth roughly $15 billion in 2025 and is projected to more than double, toward 32 to 37 billion over the next decade. That entire industry is built on freeze-dried, shelf-stable capsules, most carrying one to a handful of well-characterized industrial strains. There is a simple reason for that. Manufacturing and stabilizing a 20-plus strain living product at commercial scale is expensive and technically hard. Isolating a couple of rugged strains, freeze-drying them, and sealing them in a capsule with a shelf life is cheap and repeatable, and the CFU count on that capsule is guaranteed only at the moment of testing. Viability commonly fades by the expiration date. That is not fraud. It is the built-in limitation of the freeze-dry and seal format, a limitation a fresh living ferment simply does not share. But the deepest reason is structural, and you already see it. A living culture you buy once for $20 or $30 that multiplies in your kitchen and never needs rebuying is a terrible recurring revenue product. A capsule you must repurchase every single month is a wonderful one. Nobody had to suppress Kefir. The economics quietly did the work. There is no incentive anywhere in a $30 billion industry to point you toward the one-time item that feeds you forever. So let the two numbers stand side by side and speak for themselves. Up to 61, verified by DNA, versus 1 or 2 printed on the label. And while the modern supplement aisle forgot, half the world never did. In Russia and across Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic states, Kefir was never a wellness novelty. It is a daily staple in every grocery, drunk like milk. In the Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the mountain peoples who started it all, the knowledge of making it has passed unbroken through generations. Central Asian and Tibetan communities keep their own distinct grain lineages with their own microbial fingerprints. Brazil has a thriving home fermentation culture with its own strain profile carried by diaspora. The capsule is a recent invention. The jar has been on the counter for centuries. So here is how you put the jar back on your own counter, with real numbers. First, source the right thing, because this is where most people get cheated. You want live, active milk Kefir grains, not a freeze-dried starter powder. The powders are single-use packets that support only a few fermentation cycles and then fade, and they do not carry the strain diversity that makes real grains worth having. Real grains are small, irregular, rubbery clusters, pea to walnut-sized, off-white to pale yellow, and they smell pleasantly tangy and yeasty. Never foul. Established suppliers like Cultures for Health or Yimmu's sell live grains for a one-time cost of roughly $17 to $35 including shipping. That is the entire lifetime cost. After that you buy only milk. The method is almost embarrassingly simple. Put about 1 tablespoon of grains into 1 to 2 cups of fresh milk in a clean glass jar. Whole cow's milk gives the creamiest result. Avoid ultra-pasteurized milk which ferments unreliably. Cover it loosely with a cloth or a loose lid, never airtight, and leave it at room temperature, ideally between 65 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit, with about 71 degrees being the sweet spot. Let it sit roughly 24 hours, anywhere from 12 to 36 depending on your taste and your kitchen's warmth. The milk thickens and turns pleasantly tangy. Strain out the grains with a plastic or stainless mesh strainer, avoiding reactive metals, and drop those same grains straight into fresh milk to start the next batch. The strained liquid is ready to drink. If you want a fizzy, fruity version, give it an optional second ferment, adding fruit and leaving it another 12 to 24 hours to build carbonation. The grains never run out. They grow and multiply, and as they do, you increase your milk to grain ratio. Mature grains handling anywhere from 1 part grains to 15 or even 60 parts milk, or you simply shorten the ferment to keep the flavour consistent. Excess grains get gifted, composted or used to start more jars. One batch replaces a 32-ounce bottle of store Kefir, $4 to $6 retail, for pennies of milk. Now the safety. Because this is dairy and it deserves respect. Kefir is lower in lactose than milk, but not lactose-free, so if you're severely lactose intolerant or allergic to milk protein, do not assume it is safe. Start with just a few ounces to let your gut adjust. Use only pasteurized milk unless your household already runs an established raw milk protocol. because raw milk carries its own separate pathogen risks that have nothing to do with the culture. Keep your equipment clean and non-reactive, Glau stainless. Discard any batch that shows pink, blue, green, black or fuzzy mold, unusual sliminess, or a foul rather than tangy smell, because mold produces toxins that fermentation does not neutralize. And if you are immunocompromised, have a central line, or are recovering from major surgery, talk to a clinician before starting any home ferment, because rare opportunistic infections from contaminated home cultures have been documented. Now picture the future this buys you, 10 years from now, when the price of everything in a bottle has climbed, and your neighbours are still paying $40 a month for 2 freeze-dried strains that fade by their own expiration date. You will walk into your kitchen, lift a cloth off a jar, and pour a glass of living food that costs you almost nothing and multiplies faster than you can drink it. No prescription, no permit, no refill. A culture that came out of a mountain range on the far side of the world and asked for nothing but milk and a little time. That is not a supplement. That is independence. They will not tell you that DNA sequencing found up to 61 kinds of bacteria in a food you can make on your counter. They will not tell you that their capsule holds one, guaranteed only on the day it was tested. They will not tell you that Kefir microbes are built to grip your gut lining while a freeze-dried passenger washes straight through. They will not tell you that the whole thing costs $20 once and then never again, because a product you only buy once is the one thing their industry has no reason to sell you. This channel exists so that knowledge like this keeps passing hand to hand, the way the grains always did, outside the reach of anything that can be taxed, patented or rebought. Subscribe to Lost Plant Remedies before this video disappears, because we cover the ferments, the plants, and the forgotten knowledge that powerful industries would prefer you never rediscover. And grab my free 5-day course, The Lost Ferment, linked in the description below. It costs nothing.